Jensen coming back. Jensen is one of our star agents doing a lot of variety trials. So I'm going to turn it over to him to talk about some of the work that he's been doing.
All right. Yep. Thanks. I'm back. Like Ted said, I enjoy doing variety trials and finding crops, varieties of crops that do well in Hawaii, especially. I also get to experience new things, which is one of the reasons why I do a lot of these variety trials, so I can get a better understanding of how these crops are being grown, what the challenges are, and how I may better serve the growers on Oahu and throughout the state on producing various crops efficiently. So over the last year, myself as well as a bunch of other agents, researchers, students have been working on a bunch of different variety trials, and I'm just going to feature a couple here just because I only have 15 minutes. One of the ones I've done in the last couple of years is evaluating jalapeno varieties for productivity, and I was looking into the value-added products, so looking into making chipotle products, sauces, spices, stuff like that. So we did a variety trial with 20 different varieties. As you can see here on this graph, this is just showing number of fruits. So you have very productive varieties like purple jalapeno, dolce, satsu, and a few number of varieties. So the graph, the bars that have these letters basically represents differences in the statistics. So if the letters are the same, that means they weren't necessarily different. So up to about here, La Bambas, the number of fruits per plant were pretty similar. And then you go into overall yield, you see a little bit more standouts where basically everything right of that red line were pretty productive statistically, and everything below that were not as productive. And then you can see some of the quality and characteristics of a bunch of these varieties. So that Wailua one on the left was kind of our control. It's a variety being sold. I think it's still being sold by our seed lab at UH. And then the rest of the varieties were either commercially available, or I was able to get seeds from a few different researchers doing research on them. Also looking at some varieties that were mild for those that want that jalapeno flavor, but not necessarily want the heat related to the jalapeno. And then there's some interesting varieties like purple jalapeno, which has that nice purple coloring on the fruit when you're harvesting it. For the most part, all of them were really productive. There were some issues with pepper weevil. We did incorporate pheromone traps to try and reduce the pressure, as well as a few insecticidal sprays to keep the pressure down, and we're able to get successful harvest. And like I mentioned, I was trying to do all of this mostly for the value addition portion of it. So using a smoker, we were smoke dehydrating the mature red fruit. And then the image on the right is that dry product. So from here, we were putting it through a grinder and grinding it to powder and making sauces and some other stuff with KCC. Another one my student and I just completed this year with the help of a bunch of different people, was looking at Brussels sprouts and some of the varieties that may be productive in Hawaii. As far as I know, there's not a lot of people growing Brussels sprouts commercially anyway in Hawaii. So I was interested at looking at the potential of this crop and if there were any standout varieties as far as Brussels sprout production in Hawaii. And it seemed to be pretty productive for the most part. This was done in spring, so it was past the winter months, which I probably would have done it in the winter when it was a little bit cooler and expect a little bit better harvest. So here you can see the yields. We did the pruning of the stems. We did remove the apical dominants a few weeks prior to harvest to kind of get these mini cabbage heads to kind of form on the stem. And the image on the right shows kind of what the harvest was like per about 10 to 15 feet of row space. For the most part, I think the jade varieties were really productive, mainly the jade cross. And the cool thing about this variety was a kind of a compact plant. So it was maybe about 18 inches tall versus some of the other varieties were about 2 feet tall to maybe 2.5 feet tall. So it was nice and compact. Uh, from a harvest standpoint, it's not that good, but the number of uh, heads, I guess, or sprouts on that short stem was really good on this crop versus uh, I believe that one is a Dagon, which was also one of the more productive varieties in the trial. But it does have potential for production. I think during the winter months, you probably see a little bit better production. And then the main one I kind of wanted to focus on, which has been one of my major projects for the last 3 years now, is looking at commercial garlic production in Hawaii. And on this grant, we have Kylie Tavares and Sharon Wages working on this project as well. And for the last 3 years, we've been successfully growing garlic in Hawaii, both in Pomoho, Wailua, Oahu, and up in Kula, Maui. And just recently, we've been awarded monies to do a little bit more trials out on the Big Island. So we should be doing some more trials up at Lalamilo, one in Kona at the Kainaliu station, and then one in Hilo at the Komohana station or research facility. So for that Oahu trial at Pomoho, this was done in 2020. We planted in January, harvested about April. You can see our average temperatures during the year. We're about 700 feet elevation, so we're not really high, and we're getting about 36 inches of rainfall. This particular trial, we tried to identify metrics that we could evaluate this particular crop on, and based on USDA standards, there's a requirement for 1.5 inches as far as on the grade or number one crops. So everything in blue on average met that 1.5 inch diameter requirement. The ones in red didn't meet those requirements for this particular trial. And then the ones on the right you see in darker blue. This is the overall yield or weights of each individual bulb on average. So the ones in dark blue on the right were one of the ones that we identified as being more productive. Because we had so many varieties, I basically kind of took just the top 15, top 12 varieties to continue on with the trials, and we got rid of some of the smaller ones. It was kind of replicated on Maui as well. So this is at a higher elevation, about 3,000 feet elevation. Not as much rainfall, a lot lower temperatures, planted about the same time. Up there, we saw a lot more grade number ones. And we kind of saw similar, I guess, ideal varieties. So with the two trials, we basically moved forward with using those varieties as our standards for most of the trials that we've been conducting forward. So German Extra has been one of the standard ones that have been pretty productive and consistent every time we've tried it. It's a porcelain type. We also included some Asiatic and turban types, which also seem to be some of the more productive types in Hawaii. And then the artichokes were a little less productive, had a little bit of off shapes, which you can see some of these varieties showing the splitting happening. Silver skin is kind of the standard in California, and we didn't see very productive varieties within this group of crops. So we didn't really replicate these types of varieties, and it could be due to lack of vernalization needed to get good quality crop. And then we had some other kind of fancy ones like these Creoles, which had a little bit reddish tinges to the wrapper leaves. And then recently this year we harvested our second round of these crops up at Pomoho. Kind of saw similar results. So the ones on the right, kind of up to the chestnut red, kind of met that 1.5 inch diameter standard. And then, like always, the German Extra has been so consistent that it's been the one variety that I've been recommending to growers to try and grow on their farms, because it's been so consistent, and there's a bunch of new commercial farmers starting to grow this variety pretty successfully, especially during the winter months. And then future trials, looking at spaghetti squash, head cabbage has been one of the crops that I continually look for softer, more resistant varieties to DBM. I did try a broccolini trial last year, which didn't get to harvest because the chickens got to it before harvest. So I'm gonna try to do that again this winter. Like I said, we're gonna do some more garlic up in the Big Island this year. And then you're more than welcome to email me with suggestions on varieties that you want to see evaluate, or crops that you want to see evaluated, and identify varieties that do well in Hawaii. But that's it. And there's a few questions, looks like, in the chat.
Yeah, if you can see the chat and
Yeah.
want to answer quickly a couple of the questions, that'd be fine. And then we want to keep moving.
So I think with less rainfall is probably better during, especially during the harvest months, but during the production period, rainfall is, or moisture is, adequate moisture is required. The other question looks like it's for Amjad for the distribution of plants, and I think he got it. Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Jensen. Appreciate it. We're going to turn it over to Kylie Tavares, who's taking lead for the turmeric team and going to be presenting some of the updates on the turmeric project.